Hi everyone. Welcome to week 11 of English 1302. I want to take a few moments and go over with you the readings for week 11, the 5 poems by Robert Frost, and kind of do a deep dive on one or two of those. Okay, so what do you remember about Robert Frost? Because his life really does play a very important role in how he writes his poem, what he writes. So, his nickname is the Poet of New England because he writes about the beauty of nature, and New England has some beautiful natural resources and just forests and hills and trees and birds and flowers and stuff. Very gorgeous part of the country, I'm told. So he decides to immerse himself in the beauty of nature and what he can learn from it. So, I know that you're taking notes as you go through the PowerPoints, hopefully, and as you're listening to the videos. But one thing that will help you a lot is if you will jot down the major themes of Robert Frost. Limitations and isolation of the individual, difficulty of understanding existence, death, entropy, and extinction, youth and loss of innocence, nature as a source of wisdom, and everyday life. I told my students last night that your next quiz is going to be a little different because rather than just asking you simply about the content of the poem, I will give you a short quote from the poem, one or two of the more famous lines, and I'll ask you, which poem did this come from? The best way to study for this is just to read the poems. Read them over again, read them out loud, read them silently, read them to your dog. Read them. Read them more than once. Read them on Monday, read them again on Wednesday. Just read the poems. Sometimes it's helpful to hear it from a different voice. YouTube is a wonderful tool for that. But tonight I'm going to share with you my rendition of Mending Wall. Now, first of all, you got to kind of remember and kind of visualize this in your mind. We're not talking about a wall like this. We're talking about just a fence about knee high, and really it's just a bunch of rocks piled on top of each other. There's no mortar, no cement, so the only thing holding these rocks in place is gravity. Some of the rocks are fairly round, like balls. Some of them are like loaves of bread, flat on one side and round on the other side. So you can imagine the difficulty of stacking them on top of each other and getting them to stay. He says, we have to use a magic spell to get them to stay until our backs are turned. So anyway, this is the poem Mending Wall. He says, something there is that doesn't love a wall, that sends the frozen groundswell under it, and spills the upper boulders in the sun, and makes gaps that even two can pass abreast. The work of hunters is another thing. I have come after them and made repair, where they have left not one stone on a stone, but they would have the rabbit out of hiding to please the yelping dogs. The gaps, I mean. No one has ever seen them made or heard them made, but at spring mending time we find them there. I let my neighbor know beyond the hill, and on a day we meet to walk the line and set the wall between us once again. We keep the wall between us as we go, to each the boulders that have fallen to each. And some are loaves, and some so nearly balls, we have to use a spell to make them balance. Stay where you are till our backs are turned. We wear our fingers rough with handling them. Oh, just another kind of outdoor game, one on a side, it comes to little more. But there where it is, we do not need the wall. He is all pine, and I am all apple orchard. My apple trees will never get across and eat the pine cones, I tell him. He only says, quote, good fences make good neighbors. Spring is the mischief in me, and I wonder if I could put a notion into his head. Why do they make good neighbors? Isn't it where there are cows? But here there are no cows. Before I'd built a wall, I'd ask to know what I was walling in or walling out, and to whom I was like to give offense. Something there is that doesn't love a wall, that wants it down. I could say elves to him, but it's not elves exactly, and I'd rather he said it for himself. I see him there, bringing a stone grasped firmly by the top in each hand, like an old stone savage armed. He moves in darkness, it seems to me, not of woods only, in the shade of trees. He will not go behind his father's saying, and likes having thought of it so well, he says again, good fences make good neighbors. Nice little poem, pretty straightforward. The plot of the poem, as far as poems can have a plot, is simply two men go out on the same day it's really not even a fence or a wall. It's really just a boundary line. You got these rocks that are stacked up about knee high, and some of them have fallen off. Whether it's the ground that has frozen under them or hunters have disassembled it in order to get to the rabbit. Here in West Texas, the wind would blow them over, but they walk along side by side to put the rocks back to keep the wall between them. And the speaker of the poem, who we assume is Robert Frost, is speaking to his neighbor, and he's kind of giving him the goat. He's kind of getting after him. He's asking him, why do we need a wall here? Why do we need this fence? Your tree, all you have are pine trees, and all I have are apple trees, and my trees are not going to eat your trees. You know, if we had cows, we might need a fence, but we don't have cows, so why do we need a fence? And the neighbor really can't think of anything to say other than something his father taught him: good fences make good neighbors. Now, we'll talk about boundaries in just a second, and limitations and isolation of the individual, one of his main themes. But Robert Frost won't let it go. He said, I'd like to tell him it's elves, meaning any sort of mystical creature or any sort of supernatural occurrence. I could tell him that it's elves that have been taking down our fence, but I'd rather he thought of it for himself. But he won't or can't. And the only thing he can think to do is to say the same thing over again: good fences make good neighbors. In one sense, this is the speaker of the poem calling his neighbor a not very bright person. In poetry, as you know, words mean more than one thing. And when the poem says that the neighbor walks in darkness, not of shade and trees only, meaning he's in the dark, where light represents enlightenment and knowledge and understanding, his friend is walking in darkness. He doesn't have understanding. He doesn't have knowledge. He describes him as a Neanderthal. He says he's an old stone savage armed. He's basically palming these rocks, the size of basketballs, and carrying them like he's fixed to go off to battle. There's a little bit of hyperbole here when he describes the rocks as boulders. I think he does that twice. Hyperbole, of course, is an exaggeration. They're not stacking boulders the size of Volkswagens. They're just putting, rocks the size of bread on top of each other. Let's see. Oh, and the elves, that's a good example of metonymy. Yeah, where you take one thing out of a larger group and let it represent the larger group. Elves represents any sort of magical or mystical fairy type creature. And so, yeah, good example of that. And let's see, what else are we here? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He just tells a little story, and he says his neighbor is not very bright because he lacks the imagination. All right. So we said earlier that one of Robert Frost's main themes is the limitations and isolation of the individual. And that's what's happening here. These men are limiting and isolating themselves with an unnecessary wall. Now, you could argue that it's necessary as a boundary, as, this is my property, that's your property. But what Frost asks, can't we just have a line? Can't we just know where that line is? Do we have to have something set up designed to keep us out when we're not going that way anyway? And so, yeah, it fits one of his main themes very nicely. There's nothing about death in here. You could argue a little bit that it's about the difficulty of understanding existence, not because the speaker has difficulty, but because the neighbor does. And yeah, everyday life. Oh, nature is a source of wisdom. Of course, yeah, nature is showing him that you don't need to limit, you don't need to set these boundaries, which are unnecessary. So it's a nice little poem. And if you just read it through carefully and highlight or underline what you think are the important parts, then compare it to the major themes, I really think you'll understand it better. None of these poems are very difficult. YouTube is out there, and you can just look these up. I prefer the poems on YouTube called Favorite Poem Project or Favorite Poet Project. I think we have time to do one more real quick. Let's do that real short one called Dust of Snow. This is, even though it's very short, it's very interesting. It says, Dust of Snow by Robert Frost. The way a crow shook down on me the dust of snow from a hemlock tree has given my heart a change of mood and saved some part of a day I had rued. Now, first of all, you'll notice that I gave a distinct pause there at the end of each line because that's what the poet does. He gives us these short lines, and so he wants us to give a not a complete stop, or he put a period, just a long pause in order to let each line kind of stand on its own. Now, if you had to look up some words here, I had to look up the word rue. Rued, R-E-R-U-E-D, is the past tense form of the verb to rue, which means to regret. So this one little event kind of saved some part of a day that I regretted. Something bad happened, or I wasn't having a good day, things are not going my way, and then this nice little thing happened, and it kind of cheered me up. Well, what happened? A crow is sitting in a tree, and when it took off, it shook down just a light dusting, not a heavy, downfall of snow, just a light dusting of snow from this tree, and it just kind of cheered me up. It's just kind of pleasant, kind of nice, and made me feel better. Now, if you look at the poem just a little bit deeper, if you ask yourself what and what else, we see that the bird is specifically a crow. Nothing wrong with crows, except they are often associated with death. Yes, a collection of crows, a group of 2 or 3 crows, is called a murder of crows. Edgar Allan Poe, of course, uses crows a lot. Crows were, at medieval times, were known to follow armies because the crows knew that armies lead to battles and battles lead to dead bodies, and crows eat carrion. So, crows are associated with death and darkness and dying and eating dead flesh. And it lights in a hemlock tree. Now, if you didn't know this, you might have had to look this up, but hemlock is a famous poison. If you brush up on your Greek mythology, your Greek philosophy, not mythology, your philosophy, you know Socrates was a famous philosopher who taught the young boys of Athens, and he got in trouble from the political bigwigs, from the political leaders, for teaching them the truth. And they said, we want you to quit teaching these ideas to the young men because they're getting them all riled up and stuff. And he says, nope, I'm not going to. I'm going to keep teaching the truth. And so they executed him by making him drink hemlock. So in literature, hemlock is a famous poison. So why does Robert Frost choose to use a crow, a bird of death, and a hemlock tree, a tree of poison, if his main idea is just, hey, this little thing happened and it cheered me up? If that's the main idea, why does he start off with such dark and dismal beginnings, the first half of the poem? Because he's trying to show you how easy it is to flip, to change from dark and death to light and life, and just in the space of 8 lines, he does a nice little job of that. Again, it's not a heavy, serious poem. It's just and you do have to look for some of these things. You have to look up some of these words, some of the implied meanings, some of the associations. What in poetry, what we call the connotations. The dictionary meaning, the denotation of a crow is just a bird, but the connotation, the association is with death. Hemlock, same thing. Hemlock's just a tree, but it can be used to make a powerful poison. So you have to kind of look up some of these words. After apple picking is a nice one. It's about he's when you read this, it'll make more sense to you if you haven't read it yet. But read it. If you have read it, read it again. It's about a guy who wished for a very busy, productive life, and he got what he wanted, and then he's just so tired of life that he's ready to die. This poem is about death, and yeah, he talks about the woodchuck sleep, and he's like, I don't know if this is going to be a long sleep with like an afterlife, a heaven or hell, or if this is just going to be like a blink of non-existence. He says we'd have to ask the woodchuck whether it's like his or not, and woodchucks do hibernate. Birches is another interesting poem. Now, I have not read anything about Robert Frost being either Christian or an atheist, but based on some of the subtext of his poems, I think it's safe to say he's at least an agnostic. He's not a clearly outspoken Christian or Jew in any of his writings. And so in the poem Birches, we see a good example of this. The birch is just a skinny white tree with black markings on it. And it's true, just like he describes in the poem. We don't have them here, but if you climb to the top of one as a small boy and hold on, the tree will slowly bend over and you can let go, and then the tree will flip back up. If you do it over and over again, which he also describes, it will stay permanently bowed over. Now, if you do some research on these poems and you read something about the sexuality of this poem, please ignore that. I've read this poem multiple times and I don't see any sexuality in here. I understand how some people could, but to me that's too much of a stretch. I don't mind stretching a little bit, but no, I don't see that in here. What I do see though is a desire for reincarnation. He compares climbing this tree to life. We start off as a little boy, and the higher up we go, the older we get. As we climb toward heaven, toward is in italics, as we climb toward heaven, then what he wishes is that the tree would set us down and we get to start all over again. That would be a good thing, is what he says. And do that over and over again, just constant reincarnation is, I think, something he would look for. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches. Now, another nice thing about YouTube, I know I keep harping on that, but it does present some visual images, and his poems are very filled with images. So if you can see what he's talking about, it will help you to visualize and help you understand these poems better. All right. Okay, we got those. Let's see. We will have another handout. Oh, yeah. Okay, you've got your last research paper assignment sheet. The research topic this time is just any aspect of higher education in the U.S. other than college, financial aid, or athletics. So something academic about higher education. My my understanding is that you are invested in higher education. You are currently devoting a good part of your life, of your energy, of your intellect, and your money to go to college. You've asked to be here, you've applied to get in. And so I think if you understand a little bit more about how colleges work, it might benefit you. So pick some aspect of higher education. It can be just anything. We were talking last night about, and by the way, don't forget, you're welcome to attend either my Monday night class at 7 or my Thursday night class at 5:30, because we do get some good discussions going. But we were talking last night about traditions in college. College is famous for having some sometimes really wacky or unexplained traditions. Now, it can't be athletics, but colleges have a lot of traditions that aren't athletic or are not done on the football field. But you can't do all of them, of course. So you need to focus in. I would pick like 3 traditions, maybe one tradition from A&M, one from Wisconsin, one from University of Delaware, and just talk about how they got started and why they are continuing. The discussion came about because we were talking about the Texas Tech tortilla toss and the trouble that Texas Tech is having trying to stop it. How some traditions just seem to take on a life of their own. They get started for sometimes an unknown reason. Uh, Harvard, they measure distances in something called Kopecks, because 100 years ago there was a student last name Kopek, and they made him lay down instead of using feet or yards, and they used his body length as one unit of measurement. So it's 20 Kopecks to the next building, or it's 150 Kopecks to the pub. Wonderful traditions, and really speak to the heart of what is unique about universities in America. So anyway, find some, or you could talk about enrollment management. You could talk about matriculation. You could talk about course requirements. Why do we have to study history and poetry and math? If if you're going to be an engineer, if you're going to be a nurse, why do you need some of these seemingly non-related topics? Where did that come from? You could talk about the history of one particular college, or the function of a tribal college or a historically black college. You could talk about the career path. How do you get to be president of Harvard? What are the day-to-day duties of the vice president of Dartmouth? Um, just any aspect of college. If you want some help, please email me. I will post up some more ideas for you a little bit later on, but go ahead and start thinking about it now. Feel free to visit with some of your other professors, and when you have questions, drop me an email, jfly at southplains college.edu. Have a good week.